This is the story of a church. A church like many others, but like no other to so many. A church with strong roots planted deep, but weakened by past storms. A church of shared liturgy, tradition, spirituality, and loving community, but one of faith forged in intellectual curiosity and fierce individualism. Those kinds of contradictions have challenged and shaped this parish from the beginning, serving to set us apart without tearing us apart. And those kinds of contradictions remain the challenge that will shape our future. Really, this is more of an overview than story, since the telling of 159 years has thousands of stories. It's not a history because we've been there and done that, and done it very well when we published Grace St. Luke's The First 50 Years in 1990. There, and in various parish profiles and myriad church records before and since, you'll find the detail, the names, the dates, the numbers, and the memorials. Here we're going to spend a little time behind and between those lines. With apologies to Mr. Dickens, one might think of the history of Grace St. Luke's Episcopal Church as a tale of two cities, and appropriately, we could refer to the year the church was formed as the best of times and the worst of times. The first of those cities was a bustling, rambunctious, rowdy river town with equal parts successful, fashionable families, immigrants from around the world, and wild, untamed enthusiasm for gambling, drinking, and generally disturbing the peace. Seems like a good place for Grace Church to set up shop, and they did so in a room above a saloon in 1850 as a mission of Calvary Church. Despite the Civil War, 2 yellow fever epidemics, and a couple of fires, Grace Church would flourish at the corner of Vance and Lauderdale, even commissioning Louis Comfort Tiffany for a signature window above the altar. Tiffany would eventually design 7 windows for the parish. The second city was really an outlying, fast-growing area called Idlewild, a suburb forefather, if you will, including today's Central Gardens, where people were migrating east to avoid the hustle, bustle, and problems of close urban life. Because of the condition of roads and the difficulty of travel, those folks wanted their own churches close by. Again, Calvary Church obliged with another mission, establishing St. Luke's Church at the corner of Idlewild and Union in 1894. Their growth was impressive as well, and with great fanfare, the cornerstone for their new church was laid at the corner of Peabody and Lemaster in October of 1912. It would become a cornerstone in so many lives, in so many ways, over so many years. 1940, the year the parishes would merge, was the best of times for Grace Church. They were flush when virtually no one else was, and were planning on building a new church closer to where their congregation was moving and away from a neighborhood in transition. They'd already sold their building, and it's still there, now Mount Nebo Church. For St. Luke's, it was the worst of times, deeply in debt and struggling. As Europe went to war and the whole world became an uncertain place, Bishop Maxon made certain that 2 parishes would become one to weather the storm, arranging what might be best described as a shotgun wedding. One parish family had the money and nice wedding gifts. The other had a nice home to put it all in. Grace and St. Luke's came together at the altar for the first combined service on Thanksgiving Day, 1940. Grace brought their Tiffany's, their elaborate woodwork, their chancel decorations, their altar, and the first rector of Grace St. Luke's, the Reverend William Geary. The rector of St. Luke's, the Reverend Dr. Charles Stewart Hale, would become associate rector, and then the second rector of the parish after Reverend Geary's death in 1946. Upon his death in 1956, Dr. Hale would be buried in the chapel beneath the original altar of his beloved St. Luke's. Reverend Geary would involve the church in a number of community outreach programs and ambitiously initiate the building of a new parish house and a project to replace the plain windows of the nave with stained glass, and acquire the property next door to give the church control of the whole block facing Peabody between the corners of Belvedere and Lemaster. Cornerstone. Dr. Hale, a former banker, was a reserved, scholarly soul, and Grace St. Luke's School began on his watch in 1947, first housing the kindergarten of St. Mary's School, then the elementary school. But times were changing, and people were moving. While the church's property would grow fivefold since the war, communicants would drop by more than half. As his successor, the church called the Reverend Richard McDonnell, in many ways the opposite of Dr. Hale. Not only not reserved, but very different, charismatic, outspoken. He had great fans and great detractors, and very few occupied the middle ground. But he, like Dr. Hale, was significant in the history of the school, overseeing the construction of the first school building and the official naming and chartering of Grace St. Luke's Episcopal School. However, the number of communicants continued to drop. In 1961, he would be the first rector to resign under pressure. In 1962, the church would call the Reverend Brinkley Morton, again, almost the exact opposite of the previous rector, and Grace St. Luke's would enjoy its greatest growth during his tenure. Cornerstone. Before seminary, Brinkley Morton was a highly decorated World War II and Korean War veteran, an attorney, and he wasn't just from around here. He was an Ole Miss graduate and a former member of both the Mississippi House and Senate. Very conservative in both theology and ideology, his strong leadership saw the parish grow from about 500 communicants to more than 1,800 when he left in 1974, the largest parish in the state of Tennessee. In fact, those numbers and that distinction would remain on the church record and in the minds of parishioners long after either was factual. Father Morton would become Bishop of San Diego, retire, and return to Grace St. Luke's as a parishioner at the end of his life. While the church and school numbers grew, property and buildings were added and remodeled, it was a turbulent time for the nation, the South, and Memphis, as the city became the epicenter for the civil rights movement with the assassination of Martin Luther King. The parish would take no position at this pivotal point and quietly turn inward, using its size and financial clout to dictate to the diocese, and earning a reputation of acting as a diocese of one. A touch of that reputation remains. The Reverend William B. Trimble, Jr. would be called to step into Brinkley Morton's legendary footprint in 1975. And while they may have thought the Navy veteran was going to follow Morton's footsteps, the parish once again got an opposite. They were both charismatic, natural leaders, both in their middle 30s when called here. But Bill Trimble not only faced the church's challenges and changes, he championed them, embracing the 1979 prayer book and the ordination of women. In fact, one of Grace St. Luke's own, Ann Carriere, would become the first woman ordained in the Diocese of Tennessee. While all this would cause prayerful gnashing of teeth among longtime parishioners, new young families were attracted to Trimble's outgoing style and the ever-growing school. And they were also returning to Midtown to raise their families. Many of those families can still be found in our pews, now the ones prayerfully gnashing their teeth about changes in the church. Outreach and community involvement would also grow, as would spiritual development programs within the church. The music program would explode, involving more members of the parish of all ages than ever before. During his time, the school would move to K through 8 from K through 12, consolidating resources and establishing it as a trusted feeder school to area high schools, private and public. Unfortunately, Father Trimble's lack of control and discretion in his personal life and lack of honesty with his family and his parish caused a crisis of faith that led him to being the second rector to resign under pressure. Cornerstone. And in 1986, the church called an opposite, the Reverend Charles Riddle, not charismatic, but solid and reliable, not young and ambitious, but older and settled. A former Marine, a fact you would be made aware of in every sermon, Charlie Riddle was safe, comfortable, and likable. He would lead the largest capital campaign in the church's history, joining the school and adding new buildings and athletic facilities. However, that campaign would come up short of goal, and would also spark a power play between camps of the ambitious headmaster of the school and the rector. When it ended, there were no winners. The headmaster lost his job, and Father Riddle became the third rector to resign under pressure. a bitter taste and lasting scars were left behind. Cornerstone. In 1992, the search committee would call, yes, an opposite. The Reverend David Fikes was returned to charismatic, young, and ambitious. Under Father Fikes, an inspired preacher and teacher, the church would become more involved in the broader community than ever before, and start a number of in-reach activities to heal wounds and bring the parish together. Young families would again join, and parishioners would throw themselves into church events and activities with real energy. The school and church would work effectively together, both recognizing that they needed each other. Importantly, the church would begin to recognize itself as an urban, midtown neighborhood parish, not a suburban corporate parish, and understand that the school was quite possibly its most effective outreach program, not its rich history or past glories. The school, in turn, would recognize the importance of the church's liturgical and spiritual underpinning, and the attraction of that to parents. You might say they had faith in each other. Cornerstone. There was some my way or the highway about Father Fikes, and there were controversies and challenges, as always. And again, some personal issues for the rector. But Father Fikes accomplished much to restore the health of the parish. He had a large and passionate following, and when he left after 7 years to accept another call, he left an emptiness in some they weren't sure could be refilled, and questions that needed answers. So the parish did an extensive parish profile and an exhaustive search, this time looking for less of a visionary and more of a hands-on, down-to-earth pastor with strong organizational, communications, and administrative skills. And they called the Reverend John Maloney in 2001. Almost becoming a monk as a young man and brought up Roman Catholic, Father Maloney turned out to be an engaging, deeply spiritual man, a theologian, a sacramental artist, an accomplished cook, a prankster with a puckish sense of humor and a ready smile, and, well, a visionary, although he had trouble getting others to see what he saw. What he did not turn out to be was an organizer, communicator, or administrator. Although it was not his intent, and he didn't realize much of it was happening, people began to feel a little ignored, a little left out, a little sidelined. While the church became more pastoral in the community, and more involved with the national church and the diocese under Father Maloney, he also involved the church more ecumenically in the programs and activities of other churches. Just such a move, in keeping with his vision of an urban church and providing meals for the homeless on church property, turned out to be his most polarizing move as rector. Maybe not because of just that, but because of the lack of communication and buy-in by the whole parish and school community that it represented. Cornerstone. In the face of declining support and numbers, John Maloney would be the fourth rector to resign under pressure. So, is Grace St. Luke's a larger-than-life historical Episcopal icon known far and wide for generations, or a medium-sized neighborhood parish in the midst of reinventing itself to stay relevant? Yes. Is the church guilty of expecting too much of its rectors and too quick to judgment? Or is it a place that reveres its rectors and hangs on their every word? Most certainly. Are we a conservative, sacramental parish that respects the liturgy of the church and is suspicious of change? Or are we a parish that invites discussion, encourages exploration, and embraces and respects differences? Absolutely. Are we surviving because we have a vibrant parish school serving and attracting young families? Or are we surviving because of core support and dedication in our congregation? Or are we surviving by our faith and its demonstration in our lives and in others? Yes, yes, and yes. We're all about contradictions, all sharing this sacred space. And over the last 2 years, we've also shared our feelings, our concerns, and we've learned that we are all of the above. All part of the time-tested mortar that holds it in place and will hold it going forward. The question for us, and for our next rector, is not why we have survived, but how we'll continue to thrive. We have made this a warm corner in this city, built a large tent for all to shelter, and become home to a friendly and inviting family of faith. The congregation is festive, and feisty and fun. We worship and celebrate here. We and our children learn and grow here. We all play here and pray here. And from here we serve those in need in God's name. For generation after generation, life has been lived, history made, and faith found on this corner. Who will lead the next? The weight of the Cornerstone is immense, as is its capacity to anchor and support.